Hi, this is Lisa Rawls with the Winnebago County Conservation Board, and I want to welcome you to our annual Monarch program that we do every year. Normally we do this program at Thorpe Park, and it usually works out pretty well there, but unfortunately because of the COVID situation, we are doing it virtually this year, but hopefully you will enjoy it and you will learn a little bit about monarch butterflies and hopefully better appreciate the really amazing insects that they really are. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk a little bit about the monarch life cycle, a little bit about the migration itself, and then of course a little bit about how we tag monarch butterflies to learn more about their life cycle and their migration. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and bring up the program that I have ready to go here. So what we're going to talk about today is incredible monarch migration. I think you're going to find that it's pretty amazing considering the size of these little critters. So it's a pretty amazing story. It's an amazing journey. Starts off, of course, inside of a little tiny egg, progresses then, of course, to a caterpillar, to a chrysalis, and then to an adult. And for some monarch butterflies, we'll talk about which ones, but for some monarch butterflies, the journey continues all the way to Mexico. So this is their story. And like I said, no matter whether the monarch butterfly ends up in Mexico or it doesn't, it always begins inside of a little tiny egg. And that egg is very, very tiny. It's about the size of a grain of sand, and it's always laid on a milkweed leaf, usually on the underside of a milkweed leaf. We'll talk about why that is in just a minute. But this is what the little egg looks like, very, very tiny. When that little caterpillar first hatches out, the first meal it actually eats is the eggshell itself. And that's because the eggshell has a lot of nutrients in it that the little caterpillar needs to get a good head start in life. And so it turns around, it feeds on that eggshell, and that's its very first meal. After that, though, it feeds only on milkweed leaves, which is why the eggs are only laid on milkweed leaves, because once those caterpillars hatch out, the only thing they will feed on are milkweed leaves. And that's because the milkweed leaves actually have a toxin in them. Called cardenolides, and those cardenolides actually provide protection for the caterpillar. They are toxins and they are toxic to most species, but a lot of insects are actually immune to them, and monarch butterflies are no exception. So when those little caterpillars feed on those milkweed leaves, they actually ingest those toxins into their bodies and they become poisonous as well. So and you can tell because if you look at their colors are the black and white and yellow. Those are warning colors to predators to not eat them because now they are poisonous. They've ingested these toxins from the milkweed plant. So when we say they're toxic, it doesn't necessarily mean that if a predator were to eat a caterpillar, they would die from it, but they would taste really, really bad, and they would probably make the predator sick. So predators learn pretty early on that if they try to eat one of these caterpillars, it's going to taste terrible. They could get sick from it. And they recognize those colors. They learn those colors, and they learn not to ever eat anything with those colors again. And so those colors will warn predators to stay away from these caterpillars. Of course, those colors are also very similar to what we see in bees, and most predators know not to eat a bee. So that kind of gives the caterpillar another form of defense as well. So after feeding on these milkweed leaves for a couple of weeks, then it's time for the caterpillar to become a chrysalis. And at this point now it's not eating anymore, so it can go anywhere it wants to hang and become a chrysalis. It might go on another plant, it might go up in a tree somewhere, it might go under a deck somewhere, but wherever it goes, it spins a little bit of silk out of its back end. And you can see in this picture that little bit of silk, we call that a silk button. And it uses that silk to attach itself to a plant or to a tree, or like I said, under a deck, someplace like that. And that's what it uses to hang from. Once it attaches that little silk button and it starts to hang, it forms this little J shape. Now, it's kind of odd to think about it, but once it forms this little J shape, it has actually already become a chrysalis. The chrysalis is actually underneath that skin. And all the caterpillar has to do now is just kind of wriggle out of that skin, and the chrysalis is underneath there. So what happens at this point is the skin actually starts to split open between the eyes and the back of the head, and just kind of starts to peel back. And the little caterpillar wiggles and wiggles and wiggles until finally it wiggles right out of that skin. And underneath that skin then is the chrysalis. Now at first the chrysalis is kind of it's kind of squishy, but eventually of course it hardens up into the chrysalis that we're familiar with. And the chrysalis is a green color because at this point now in the life cycle, camouflage is what is important. That's the important form of defense for the monarch. So the chrysalis is a green color to blend in with the trees or in with the plant that it's hanging from. The butterfly stays inside that chrysalis. Well, of course, inside that chrysalis, the adult butterfly is forming, and it takes it about 2 weeks or so. But during that time, the chrysalis will eventually kind of become a clear color, and eventually it will become completely clear to the point where you can see the butterfly's wings, you can see their legs, you can see their antennas, their body, you can see all the parts of the butterfly inside that chrysalis. When that chrysalis gets to that clear color, then that means it's ready to hatch out. And so after about 2 weeks, usually 10 to 14 days, the adult butterfly will emerge from that chrysalis. Now, when that adult emerges from that chrysalis, it's actually very small. The wings are very small and kind of shrunken because it had to fit inside that little tiny chrysalis. So when it comes out, it has to open up its wings. It has to pump fluid into its wings. It has to get those wings functioning. During that time, the wings are wet. They're not well formed. The butterfly can't fly yet. And so for at least a few hours, it is very, very vulnerable to predators. But it, again, has that form of defense we talked about before. It tastes really, really bad. And now, instead of the black and white and yellow color warning colors, now it's got orange and black warning colors. And again, predators know that those colors mean that even the adult butterfly now is still toxic. It's still poisonous. It's still going to taste really bad and probably make them sick. And so while the monarch butterfly is sitting there letting its wings dry and kind of building its wings up so that it can fly, it does have at least one form of defense, and that is that it is toxic, and predators know that. Now, once the monarch butterfly emerges out of its chrysalis, for most monarchs, then they only live a few weeks. So most monarch butterflies will hatch out, they will find a mate, they will lay their eggs, and they will die. And that is it. That is their entire life cycle. As adults, they only live for a few weeks. Now, that's most monarch butterflies. But the ones that we're seeing right now, that we're seeing flying around in our fields and our gardens right now, are very different from all the other monarch butterflies that came before them. This particular group of monarchs, this is what we call the annual super generation of monarch butterflies. These butterflies will not immediately go and find a mate. They will not lay eggs, and they will not die. Instead, they will live about 8 months. And that's because they will be the ones that will be flying down to Mexico, spending the winter in Mexico, and beginning the return trip back next spring. So these particular monarch butterflies, it's just this one generation every year, actually live much, much, much longer than their parents, their grandparents, their great-grandparents did before them. And they live much longer than, as we'll find out, their kids, their grandkids, their great-grandkids will after them. So it's just this one generation every year that makes this trip. And it is quite a trip. Most monarch butterflies will easily travel over 1,000 miles. Some will travel over 2,000. Some will actually travel over 2,500 miles from locations as far north as southern Canada, and then of course throughout the United States, and then they will end up their journey down in central Mexico. So basically all the monarch butterflies east of the Rocky Mountains end up in one little tiny area in central Mexico. The ones west of the Rocky Mountains also make a journey not quite as long over to the Pacific coast, and they tend to winter along the California coast. But all monarch butterflies east of the Rocky Mountains make this trip down to central Mexico every year. And like I said, they all end up in the exact same place. There are several what we call sanctuaries down in Mexico that, excuse me, where the butterflies spend the winter. And all the butterflies go to one of these small, tiny sanctuaries. Now, we are learning more and more about this migration. We obviously know it's a very long migration. And like I said, in a lot of cases over 2,500 miles. So it's like, how are they able to do this? Well, we know that nectar is a big part of it. Nectar fuels their journey as they're flying south. Now, nectar basically is just sugar water, so it gives them the energy they need to head south. And of course, as adults now, they're not dependent on just milkweed. Now, as adults, they can drink any kind of nectar from any kind of flower. So as they're flying south, they go from flower to flower to flower. They fuel up on this nectar. They drink this sugar water. That gives them the energy they need to fly south. Believe it or not, also, as they're drinking this nectar, they're also gaining weight. They're converting that sugar into fat, and they're actually gaining weight as they head south. And as we're going to see in just a little bit, that's going to be very important as they overwinter down in Mexico. They also tend to use the wind quite a bit as they're to help them as they fly south. So on days when the wind is out of the north and there's a nice breeze pushing south, they will get up into the sky. They will use that breeze, and they will use that breeze to help push them south. On days when the wind is out of the south, and it might take a lot of energy for them to buck that wind, they just stay put. They take a day off. They rest. They don't migrate that day because it would just take up too much energy for them to head south. They have to fight that wind. So they just sit, wait for the wind to turn around, back out of the north again, get up and migrate. So they will use the wind, and because of that, they, in some cases, can travel several hundred miles in one day if they can use that wind effectively. So they're pretty smart that way. So when they get down to Mexico, the reason they head all the way down there, they find perfect wintering conditions. Now the area that they go to is high up in the mountains, so it's cool, but it's not cold. And it's made up of an evergreen forest. And those evergreen trees provide them with a lot of shelter. They protect them. They also hold in humidity and moisture. So over the winter time, even though it may be cool, the air is still moist. And so the butterflies don't dry out. So it's just the perfect place for them to spend the winter. And you can see in this picture right here, in the middle of the picture, you can see the trees kind of look like an orange color. That orange color are actually the monarch butterflies in the trees. They just completely cover the trees down in Mexico. So yeah, they gather in huge numbers. They cover the trees. They cover the trunks, the branches, the needles. They cover every part of these trees to the point where the trees literally look orange with monarch butterflies. It's just an amazing sight. So they completely cover these trees, gather in these huge numbers. But over the winter, they basically just rest up to conserve their energy. Now remember, on the way down there, they were actually gaining weight from all that nectar they were drinking. But when they get down there, they don't really hibernate, but their metabolism slows way down. And as a result, they just use the fat that they have stored up and use that fat reserve as what they live off of during the winter time. So although they will go out and they will find some nectar down in Mexico there over the course of the winter, most of the time they are just using their fat reserves, and they're living off of their fat reserves over the winter. So that's why their migration is, and being able to find a lot of good nectar producing flowers along the way is so important, because they use that nectar to build up the reserves that help get them through the winter. Like I said, though, they will sometimes leave the trees to feed on other flowers they might find down there, to drink some water. So they will occasionally leave the trees, but for the most part, they stay up in the trees and just kind of rest up and wait for spring to come. So we kind of understand a little bit about how they're able to survive the journey and survive the winter in Mexico. But what we don't know is how they know where to go, because they all end up going to the exact same spot every year. Now, these butterflies have never been there before. And that's because once they leave and they begin to head back north again, they get up to about Texas. And that's when finally, in the southern part of the United States, that's when finally they will mate, they'll lay their eggs, and they'll die. They will never make the journey back up here. So it is their young then that will move a little bit further to the north, mate, lay their eggs and die. Their young will move a little bit further to the north, mate, lay their eggs and die. So by the time we see the butterflies coming back in the spring or early summer, we're actually seeing 2 or 3 generations removed from the ones that actually spent the winter in Mexico. So these butterflies that are flying south to Mexico will spend the winter in Mexico this winter. They will never be back down there again, and they have never been down there before now. So what scientists can't figure out is how can these butterflies find their way down there to the exact same spot every year when they have never been there, and they're many generations removed from the ones that were there last year. We know when birds migrate, young birds typically will travel with a flock of birds to learn the route that they need to take when they migrate south. Um, and so they learn that route from other birds, but these butterflies have nobody to learn from, but yet they all make it down there to the exact same spot. And that's one of the mysteries of this migration, is how they can do that. We do know, though, that the whole journey is very dangerous. Like I mentioned before, they are protected to some extent from predators because of their toxicity, but insect predators generally don't care. The toxicity doesn't seem to affect them. So you can see here in this picture, this is actually a tagged monarch, but you can see the praying mantis there has actually eaten that monarch. So they do sometimes succumb to insect predators. Of course, there's always issues with cars hitting them. There's issues of the weather, whether they might end up in a storm and get killed by a storm. They might get killed by a freak freeze event that might happen some night on the way down there. So there's a lot of things that can happen to them on the way down there. So the journey itself is very dangerous. And once they get down to Mexico, deforestation is typically a problem. They get down there usually around the end of October. But in this part of Mexico, farming is a very, very big, a very big thing that they do in Mexico. So you can see here how these farms have actually caused deforestation right up to the foot of those mountains. And those mountains are where the monarch butterflies spend the winter. Now, it'd be easy to blame the Mexican people. Why don't they just stop doing that? But the problem is the people that live in this part of Mexico are very poor. The only thing they really know how to do is farm. Unfortunately, this area does not produce a lot of good fertile soil. So when they plant their crops in these areas, they can usually only get a few years of good crops out of that soil before the soil is all used up, the nutrients are all used up. And then they have to move to another area, cut down some more trees, create a new farm for a few years until that soil is used up, and then move to another area, cut down some trees. So it's a never-ending cycle of deforestation that's occurring, and it would be nice if these people could find some other line of work, but the problem is all they know how to do is farm. That's what they do. That's what they've done for generations, and that's caused these deforestation issues down there. And when you see the deforestation up close, you can see how close a lot of this comes right up next to the monarch sanctuaries. You can see this is one of the sanctuaries in Mexico there, where the trees are literally covered with monarch butterflies. The trees are literally kind of a brown or orange color because of the monarchs. And you can see deforestation comes right up to the edge of this particular sanctuary here. So the deforestation has had an effect on the monarch overwintering sites, because it's reduced the amount of protection they have from storms and things like that. So it is causing issues. And of course, there's always a chance that deforestation will continue on into these sanctuaries, and that these sanctuaries themselves could be destroyed by the deforestation. And then of course, when monarchs return up here, they need to find milkweed plants to lay their eggs on. And that has become increasingly difficult in recent years because our milkweed plants are declining. And the main reason our milkweed plants have been declining in recent years is because of the increased use of a pesticide called glyphosate. It's otherwise known as Roundup. And what happened was, I believe it was back in the 1990s, corn and soybean crops became genetically altered to resist glyphosate or to resist Roundup. And so that meant that farmers were able to use a lot more of this herbicide on their crops over the last 20 years. So you can see in this chart how the use of glyphosate has dramatically increased over the last 20 years, just since farmers began to plant these corn and soybean crops that are genetically resistant to glyphosate. So the amount of glyphosate has dramatically increased, and that means there's been about 165 million acres of habitat loss. In other words, about 165 million acres that contained milkweed plants at one particular point, but over time, those milkweed plants have disappeared. That habitat has disappeared. And it's largely because of the increased use of Roundup or glyphosate. Climate change is also affecting monarch butterflies. As we get these extreme weather events, whether it's a hurricane that strikes right during the middle of their migration, whether it's a drought that hits in the middle of the summer so that they don't have milkweed plants to lay their eggs on, whether it's a wildfire that destroys a lot of their habitat. All of these are events that have been increasing in frequency because of climate change, and they're all events that dramatically affect monarch butterflies. So we have seen monarch butterfly numbers decrease dramatically over the last 20 years, about 80% over the last 20 years. And again, part of it is due to the fact that there's that deforestation going on in Mexico. Part of it is due to the fact that we are using more glyphosate, and part of it is due to the fact that there's just more of these climatic changes going on. Now, scientists actually estimate the population of monarch butterflies by how much area they cover in Mexico when they're overwintering there. Because remember, all the monarch butterflies east of the Rocky Mountains go to that one spot in Mexico. And so literally we can see the entire population of monarch butterflies in that one area at the same time. So what scientists can do is they can determine how large of an area those monarch butterflies are covering in Mexico, and they can determine at least whether the population is going up or down. And that's where these numbers come from. So for instance, last winter, the monarch butterflies covered an area about 2.83 hectares. In Mexico, that's about 7 acres in size. So imagine all the monarch butterflies west of the Rocky Mountains, they go to this one area in Mexico, and the area they cover is only equivalent to about 7 football fields. That's how tiny an area they're covering in Mexico. And that is a very, very small area. Scientists estimate that that area should be at least 6 hectares or about 15 acres in size, at least double what it is if the species is going to survive. Right now, what scientists are concerned about is the population of monarch butterflies has reached a point where it may be unsustainable. The population may have gotten to a point where it's unsustainable. If we don't bring that population back up quickly, it may die out. And one thing that concerns scientists is if there were to be some dramatic event that were to happen in Mexico while they're overwintering down there, it could literally wipe out most of the population. So, because the population is so small. So the population has declined dramatically in recent years. And scientists know this because they've been studying the monarchs for over 30 years. And one of the ways they've been studying the monarchs is by tagging them. They put these little stickers on their wings. I'll show you how we do that in just a minute here. They put these little stickers it's on the underside of one of the back wings of the monarch butterflies. And the little stickers actually have little identification numbers on them. So basically every monarch has an identification number. And then that way, if that monarch is ever found again, alive or dead, the scientists will know exactly which monarch butterfly it is. And they'll know where it came from, where it traveled, different things like that. So they can learn a lot of information about the migration. Basically, what they can do is they can follow the butterflies as they head south by following these tags. So what they've done in recent years also is they've gotten other people involved with this, because obviously the more butterflies that are tagged, the more information they can get. And so they've enlisted the help of literally hundreds of people all over the country to help tag monarch butterflies. And this has greatly increased the amount of information scientists have been able to get about the monarchs themselves and about their migration. The important thing that we have learned is that there are things we can all do to help out. Obviously, monarch numbers have declined, and we need to do something quickly to bring their numbers back up if they are going to survive as a species. So some of the things that we can do, we can help to plant milkweed. Milkweeds, of course, are the only host plant that they will use, the only plant they will lay their eggs on. If milkweeds do not exist, monarch butterflies do not exist. So we can help by planting more milkweed. And that will help, of course, to make up for the milkweed that has been eliminated by the increased use of glyphosate over the recent years. We can also, of course, plant other nectar-providing flowers, because as they're heading south, as they're migrating, they're stopping off and feeding on all these different flowers. So whether they're blazing stars or goldenrods, like in this picture, whether they're asters or wild bergamots or whatever kinds of flowers you can plant, any of those flowers are good for monarch butterflies and for all pollinators. But that nectar is really what helps them to fuel their journey south. So the more nectar providing flowers we can provide, not only in the fall while they're heading south, but also throughout the rest of the summer, and also those are all going to help them out. We can also help by using herbicides wisely. If you have to use herbicides in your garden or in your yard, use them wisely. Do not overuse them. Spot spray where you can. Try to avoid, of course, spraying anything that is going to kill, obviously, the insects themselves, but also milkweed plants or wildflowers. We can also fight climate change. Climate change, as I said, is affecting the monarch butterflies. We're finding out more and more all the time how much it is affecting the monarch butterflies. And so if we can fight climate change by doing things like using alternative energy sources, by recycling, by just decreasing our energy use, things like that will really make a big difference. And then, of course, you can also support conservation efforts in Mexico. Obviously, that's going to take some international cooperation. But right now, one of the things that's happening in Mexico is more of an effort to promote ecotourism. So a lot of the people in Mexico are now realizing that they can actually make quite a bit of money off of the monarch butterflies through ecotourism. And so they're beginning to see that the monarch butterflies are actually worth more to them than the trees are. And if the trees are left standing, or I should say than their crops are, the trees are left standing, then that can actually provide them with more money than cutting down the trees and growing crops. So that's just one of the things that's happening in Mexico now, to maybe try to convert that economy over from an agricultural economy to a more tourist-based economy. And so that's been one of the things that's been helping out. So hopefully if we can do all those things, we can plant the wildflowers we need, we can fight climate change, we can reduce our use of herbicides and other pesticides, we can support conservation efforts in Mexico. If we can do all of those things, even if we can't do much ourselves, if we can each do a little bit, we can each do one of those things, then hopefully the future will be pretty bright for monarch butterflies. That's our hope anyway. So that kind of gives you some information about the life cycle of the monarch butterfly, a little bit about their migration, and then of course a little bit about the tagging and conservation efforts that are going on. So I talked a little bit about the tagging. In case you're curious, these are what the little tags look like. A lot of people are concerned that maybe these tags affect the flying of the monarch butterfly, but they really don't. They are very, very lightweight. They are made of they have a very, very highly sticky glue that is used to attach them to the wings of the butterfly, so they do not come off. They don't rip the wings off or anything like that. So they are very, they're very safe for the monarch butterflies. They do not cause any harm to the monarch butterflies at all. So once we put these stickers on, and I'll show you here in just a second how we do that, then we have to record information. And so there's a data sheet that we use, and we have to record information. Of course, the tag number has to be recorded, as well as the date that the butterfly was tagged, whether it's a male or a female, and I'll show you how we determine that. Whether the butterflies were actually caught in the wild or whether they were raised as from caterpillars. And the reason that is important, the reason scientists want to know that, is because there's growing evidence that the monarch butterflies that are raised from caterpillars do not do as well surviving the migration down to Mexico. They're not sure why, but a lot of people want to raise monarch butterflies and release them, and it seems like it's very well intentioned to help out the population that way, but a lot of the recent statistics have shown, or recent research has shown, that those particular raised butterflies do not fare very well when it comes to flying south to Mexico and surviving that journey. So they want to know more about why that is. And so that's one of the reasons why when we tag these butterflies, we need to write down whether they were butterflies we caught wild out in a field somewhere, or whether they were ones that were raised indoors from a caterpillar. And then of course we also have to put down the location that we tagged the butterfly, the location they were released from as well. And that gives scientists a pretty good idea of what path these butterflies take as they're heading south in Mexico. So I'm going to kind of show you here how we determine the males from the females. It's not as tough as you might think. So I have a couple butterflies here. So there's a monarch butterfly right there. When we tag them, we want to hold them with their wings closed like this, because if we don't and their wings kind of flap around, they could break. And so this way, as you can tell, this butterfly, he's very, very docile, very calm. He's not trying to get away or anything. And that's what we want. We don't want them flapping their wings around. Now I just said he, because this one is a male, and I will show you how we know. We gently open up the wings. And as we open up the wings, let me see if I can do this so that you can see it. Okay, just a second. There we go. So you see those two dots on the back wings? Those two dots on the back wings mean that that is a male. So this is a male monarch butterfly right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to put a little sticker on the bottom of his back wing. And you can see right in the middle of that back wing is kind of a bigger, what we call a cell. It's not really a cell, but we call it a cell. It's called a discal cell. And that's where that little sticker is going to go. So we put that little sticker right there on that discal cell. There we go. And that's where it goes. And it's on there. It will not come off. And hopefully this little tag will be found, and this little butterfly will be found in Mexico in a few months. So then what I have to do then is I have to write down this information. So this particular butterfly's number is ABYY450. So I will write that number down and write down that that is a male butterfly, and put down all the information on the data sheet as far as the date and the location and things like that. I'll let him go, and hopefully we'll hear back about him. Now we'll put him back in there. I also have another butterfly here that I will tag. And this particular butterfly right here is, I believe, this is a female. So if you look at this particular, let me see if I can, I want to open her wings but not hurt her. So if you look right there, her back wings, there is no spot on those back wings. There is no spot. So that is a female. So I will take another little sticker. And we will put this little sticker on that back, the underside of that back wing. On that, what we call that discal cell right there. And there it is. There we go. And we'll write her down on there as well on the data sheet and put that information down. And what happens then after these sheets are completely filled out, they get sent back to the scientists. So most of this research is being done at the University of Kansas. That's where the Monarch Watch organization is located. Monarch Watch is the organization that is responsible for the tagging, and they are located at the University of Kansas. And so this information then will go back to the University of Kansas. In the wintertime, then they will send scientists down to Mexico to look for these tags. Now, not surprisingly, a lot of these tags are not ever seen again, and that's because, of course, there are millions of monarch butterflies in that location, and the chance of finding any of these tags is kind of like finding a needle in a haystack. So It's very difficult to find these tags amongst all of the monarch butterflies. But when they are found, scientists can look at that number, they can look back at the data sheet, and they can tell immediately where that butterfly was tagged, when it was tagged, who tagged it, and then get a pretty good idea of the route that butterfly took to get down there. Through this tagging, they're finding out exactly which monarch butterfly populations around the country tend to survive the journey down there. And they're finding out that the monarch butterflies here from the upper Midwest, in the Minnesota, Iowa area, Dakotas, that area, seem to be the ones that survive the journey the best. And so the monarch butterflies that we have in this area, I'm not saying that other monarch butterflies aren't important, but the ones that we raise here in the upper Midwest are the ones that generally are most responsible for repopulating the population each year. So those are some of the things that they are noticing and they are discovering from this tagging. These guys are really hyper right now, so we're going to move them down here. So they are getting a lot of good information about monarch butterflies from this tagging, and that's why we do it. I think that's probably all that I have for today. I hope that you have enjoyed this this presentation. I hope you've learned something, and I hope that as you watch the monarchs this this fall, and of course right now we're kind of at the peak of the monarch migration, and so all the monarch butterflies you're seeing right now are flying south. They are migrating south right now. So be on the lookout for them, and next spring when they start to come back, be on the lookout for them then as well. And hopefully you'll be able to do what you can to help them out. So even if it's just planting a few flowers here or there, recycling, or whatever you can do, every little bit is going to help out. And so I'm hoping that maybe you learned something today, and hopefully maybe you're just a little inspired to go out and help these insects, these amazing little insects, these little critters, because it's amazing to me that they are able to make that journey. And but sometimes they need a little bit of help, and hopefully we can do that. We can help them out. So again, thank you for joining me here today, and have a nice fall, and keep helping the monarchs. Thank you.